Hello and welcome to episode 24 of MMO Weekly, presented as always by MetsmerizedOnline.com. I'm your host, Sal Manzo, along with my co-host and MMO executive editor, Mike Mayer. And Mike, Edwin Díaz, the best closer in baseball in 2021, looks like he's staying in Queens for quite a while, man. Just want to get your initial thoughts on the signing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great job by the Mets to make sure they get that deal done before free agency even opens and just crosses off a huge need off their list. Now they can try to focus on some other pieces, which they have plenty of other pieces to focus on. So I think it was a really good move for them to get one of the big, I guess you would call big three, back in the organization. So the fact that it's Diaz, I think plays a big role because, as we've talked about, Drew Smith and Edwin Díaz right now is the bullpen. So that's a lot better than just Drew Smith. So yeah, I mean, that's a huge weight off Billy Epler's back to be able to have someone like that at the back of the bullpen. And it's just, we mentioned it too. I mean, after Diaz, there just wasn't a ton of, upper echelon talent on the reliever market. So you'd really, you'd be searching for a guy or a couple of guys to kind of replace that role. So I think this is a huge move by the Mets. And I think, I know we're going to dive into it more, but I just think it's a good deal for the Mets. Obviously a good deal for Diaz, breaking both reliever records for average annual value and the overall deal. So great. It's one of those, it feels like one of those rare, like, this is a great deal for both sides when it happens this early. You just don't see a ton of deals in this 5-day window.
Yeah, no, I was, obviously really surprised at that because, like you said, usually, between, now and it's going to be Thursday, I think when the offseason officially starts, or free agency officially starts, you don't see a lot of that negotiating window because guys want to hit the open market, they want to get top value, whatever. But I think in Diaz's case, obviously he got top value as far as top money. I think he feels comfortable in New York now with everything that's gone on the last couple of years and kind of riding the ship. And I think a lot of that has to do with ownership and Steve Cohen and Billy Epler. We know Cohen had Edwin Díaz at his house over the summer for dinner and, talked a lot about how, it's not just employer, I pay you, you play, we want to show that, we care about our players and as people and, relationships and things of that nature. And I think that this is the first signing or whatever, it kind of rings true to that. Obviously Diaz is getting paid a lot of money. But if he would have hit the open market, who knows what he could have gotten, right? He might have gotten, more, annual value, per year from other teams, whatever it is. But, you don't have to worry about something like that now. The Mets have their closer. They have him for 5 years. But if it all goes well, it could be a 6-year. The deal is pretty interesting. Tim Healy, I thought, broke it down very well the other day as far as, the ins and outs of the deal. He's got an opt-out after year 3, I believe. It's a club option on a 6th year. I believe I don't know if it's only this year, but I saw that I believe $26 million is backloaded on that. So that'll help alleviate a little bit.
Deferred.
Deferred, excuse me.
Yeah, 26 million is deferred. So basically what that does is just save them on what the actual annual average value is. So that helps them for competitive balance.
Right. And it helps. And, helps them now in the present. Hopefully, can put some more money towards some guys that they'll need. Obviously, there's a lot of free agents as we've talked about over the last few weeks and months leading up to this. But, I think it's something that Met fans should be excited about. Someone you didn't want to see leave after he righted the ship. I guess I will play devil's advocate. I know, friend of the show, Keith Law, put out an article just as far as, his wariness as far as volatility with relievers year to year and given these big deals. And to a point, I agree. And we've talked about that a lot. I was someone who wasn't last offseason keen on trading for Josh Hader and giving up a lot in a trade because of how volatile relievers are year to year. And in the beginning, before 2021 and 2022, I think the same could be said for Diaz as far as for the trade that they did with Seattle. But I think the difference being here is, and you've talked about it, we've talked about it, the Mets don't have anyone else. Like you said, now the bullpen is Drew Smith and Edwin Díaz. So, to say that they, overpaid, and yet maybe in, years 4 and 5 or whatever it is, he may not be throwing 100 with the razor blade slider or whatever, but for the short term, and Steve Cohen again has cemented the fact that he wants to win in the short term, the future, every term. So, that starts with bringing back your key guys. So, yes, they paid top market value. But I think that Diaz has shown now that he can pitch in New York, he can pitch in big spots. So it's just something I think overall to be excited about.
And I don't even think it's really that much of an overpay. I mean, Liam Hendricks got 18 million, and that was what was that 3 years ago now?
Right,
So salaries are higher. So this isn't even this is kind of just staying in with growth. It's not even necessarily bigger. And Chapman's was 86 million, and that was quite a few years ago. So
right,
I mean, I don't really even think it's that much of an overpay for that type of talent. And I think, I mean, if we're looking back at it, Diaz has only had one bad year with the Mets.
right,
And to be fair to him, it was first year in New York. That's a lot to take on. And they changed the balls for 2019. Right. I know many people have written about it, talking about, I think it was actually Keith Law wrote about it too, is that was a big reason why they felt like Diaz struggled that year, is because they changed the ball and they changed the grip on it, and that his slider just wasn't good. And when you change a ball and you change the seams on it, it's going to affect a guy that throws sliders at 92, 93. So you're talking about a guy that's only had one bad season in his entire career. So it's not like 2022, obviously that was his best year with the Mets. But it was no flash in the pan. This is a guy he was good in 2021. He was good in 2020. He was very good with the Mariners. That's why the Mets and other teams wanted him. Right. He was one of the best closers in baseball when he was traded to the Mets. So, and when we're talking about volatility, for the most part, that volatility, we're talking about guys that aren't the upper echelon closers. And we're talking about, if you are upper echelon guys, you're talking about when they're a little older in their 30s. Right. Diaz is still only 28. So you don't get a chance to grab an elite closer at 28 very often, because a lot of times these guys are failed starters or something like that. So they start their free agent clock a little later and they're not available at this time. So I think, I mean, it wouldn't be a surprise to still see like maybe the fifth year be bad, but this isn't a guy that he's going to be 33, 34 at the end of this thing. That's perfect. I mean, Kenley Jansen's still pitching very well at that age.
Right.
And that's one of the, I mean, it's tough to compare Edwin Díaz to anyone else because he is that dominant of reliever. So I think the Mets did the right move here. I don't really think they overpaid either. Honestly, if Edwin Díaz hits the open market, I think he gets more than that.
Right.
I think he probably gets 5 years, 110 million. I think there's a couple of teams on the table that are offering him a deal around 5 years, 110 million. There might be even a team that guarantees him a 6th year,
right,
with knowing that's what they need to do. And I think that's part of the reason why the Mets wanted to get this done, is because he was the absolute top dog at his position on the free agent market. There's no one else in the vicinity, no one else that was going to get close to this type of money. And let's face it, Diaz, by all accounts, has loved his time in New York.
Yeah.
I know it was a rough start, but he's really turned around and he's embraced New York. And he's I know he's kind of a soft-spoken guy, but he is endured in that clubhouse. He is one of the guys that talks a lot in that clubhouse, and a lot of guys look up to. So, and we mentioned it before too with Narco, the whole entrance, that is part of these negotiations. I guarantee that was a part of these negotiations. And Steve Cohen realizes the type of value that has outside of just winning games, that Edwin Díaz puts butts in the seat. I mean, Timmy Trumpet's going to come back to Citi Field at some point. I mean, that might be an annual thing now, and that's a huge draw. I mean,
absolutely,
that's part of this whole ticket. And I think if you just look at the money and be like, this is what someone gave to a reliever, you'd be like, wow, that's a lot for a reliever. But I think if you put all the pieces together of the Mets need, the fit for the Mets, where they're at right now as a franchise, and his value from a fan perspective too, I just think I think it's a very fair deal. And I think most people, that's about what I know. When the New York Post did their predictions, they said 5 years, 105 million. So this is right around there. And like I said, I would be surprised if he went to the open market and didn't get more than this. So yeah, it's a good deal. It's a good deal for the Mets, and I think it was a good thing to get it done now so that they can focus on other things.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, it was a need. They had to do it no matter what. Like we're just hitting the nail home. They had no one else. You can't lose your close, especially to the open market. God forbid you lose them to, an in-division rival, which we know has happened a lot the last few years as far as changing hands. Good players staying within the NL East and teams taking advantage of that. So, I think it
Well,
was something they had.
we know right away that the Phillies, I mean, that was Jeff Wilpon came right out and said it, that part of the reason they felt like they could give up more to trade for Edwin Diaz is because the Phillies love Diaz
Yep.
and they were involved. So David Robertson is a free agent. They have some internal options, but there's no doubt that the Phillies feeling very close to being a championship caliber team. They absolutely would have been in the running for Diaz.
Yeah.
The Braves don't have a closer. Jansen's a free agent. So, I mean, they could have been battling up the two teams right in the division. Right. And that's not even getting into, the rest of Major League Baseball. So, yeah, it's just, it could have got into a bidding war. And it's just, the Mets obviously would have still liked to get it done. But like I said, they just have so many free agents.
Right.
So this is just something off the table of Epler. And he's got to, I imagine he's feeling pretty relieved that he's already got one of the big three signed.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point too, because you think about as far as how many free agents the Mets have, and so many areas they have to now retool. If it becomes a bidding war, right, between the Mets, the Braves, and the Phillies, or even the Mets and the Braves, or Mets and the Phillies, whatever, and that price gets driven up, other teams, even if they don't get the player, right, I'm sure they would still hope to drive up the price because they know the Mets have so many holes that they're gonna have to fill. So it's in that sense a win-win, right? He still got top dollar, but I think even from what you're saying, I think it's fair as far as what the market is. And, I keep going back to the, bad stint in 2019, never hung his head, never blamed anybody else, just kept saying how he wanted to give Mets fans, prove to them that he could be the player that they wanted, that when they traded for. And he really did. And he's got the demeanor for New York. We've seen the really bad, we've seen the really good, and he's the same guy either way. And as far as you talking about how he's revered in the clubhouse, I think that goes a long way. So, great job, Billy Epler. One of about 20 dudes you got to bring back now. So, you're not going to get much sleep, I guess, between now and February. Hopefully it's sooner than that, I guess. But, a lot of things going on. And another person I guess I want to transition to there is Brandon Nimmo. I spoke a little bit with you off camera, made a joke as far as if he's going to be the other guy by Thursday that's going to sign. But, it seems like Nimmo's going to hit the free agent market. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of suitors. I would think there's at least one NL East team that should be thrown in there. One of them that just went to the World Series, I would think. It needs a center fielder. So I just want to get your thoughts quick just on, how you think Nimmo's free agency is going to look like, suitors, and, I think the Mets kind of have a shot at hopefully bringing him back.
Yeah, I think so. Going into the offseason, I think the Mets definitely, their two focuses early on were going to be Brandon Nimmo and Edwin Díaz, and They got Diaz done. From what I've heard, Nimmo hasn't been as I don't think a deal gets done before he hits the open market. I think at this point his intention is to hit the open market and hear offers from other teams. Of course, that can change. All of this stuff can change in an instant. Steve Cohen can be like, throw 7 years, $145 million at him. Brandon Nimmo's not going to hit the free agent market if that's what Steve Cohen tells Billy Epler he's good with. But it sounds like Nimmo's going to hit the free agent market, and it's tough to blame him. His agent's not an idiot. He's seen the center field market, which is Brandon Nimmo and then Kevin Kiermaier's the second best. There is nothing in the free agent market for center fielders, and it doesn't sound like, maybe a Cedric Mullins, maybe in the trade market, but even then, you'd like to think the Orioles are going to just keep who they got to try to push for winning now. Nimmo's sitting pretty in a spot. He's coming off one of the first years he's been really healthy. He's coming off a huge 5-WAR season. He's still only 29, and now he's a very good defensive center fielder.
Right.
So, 2 years ago, thinking about his free agency, you're like, well, looking at his numbers as a corner outfielder, certainly not as impressive. but when you can put up his offensive numbers and stick in center field with a good glove, I mean, we're talking about a guy that I feel like Mets fans are surprised even by some of the predictions of what he's going to get, and I think they might be surprised even more once they see what he's going to get. I see a lot of he's not a $20 million player, a center fielder that gets on base around 400. He's even if he is a risk for injury, which he's been a guy who misses games, teams are going to pay him $25 million a year to play 120 games at his level. That's what he had shown this year. Teams are going to pay for that potential. It'll all come down to years. I think I think at 5 years, a lot of teams are going to be interested.
Right.
I think it'll kind of see who wants to get into a 6-year guaranteed, or maybe a 6-year guaranteed and an option for a 7, different stuff like that. I think that'll kind of put some teams over the top. I absolutely think the Mets are going to be involved. Look, they know what Brandon Nimmo means to the organization. He's been with them since they drafted him in the first round. So, and they've developed him. Let's think about that. I mean, this was a guy that a lot of people are like, why are they? This kid didn't even play high school baseball. Why are they drafting this kid in the first round? They took him, they developed him, and now he's one of the best center fielders in baseball. And now he's going to get paid like that. So I do fully expect the Mets to be. I mean, they're going to be one of the top teams. I would be shocked if this isn't a situation where, even if he does sign somewhere else, where he's like, hey, Mets, this is what I've got. Do you guys want to match this, or this is where we want you to be, or something like that. I think Nimmo would definitely like to be back in New York. But again, it's at the end of the day, the Mets aren't going to be able to bring all of these guys back.
Right.
So there's going to be some guys that leave for more money. The Steve Cohen's got a lot of money, but they can't just spend everything. It's not realistic. But it'll be really tough to replace Brandon Nimmo, not just in center, but in the top of that lineup. So the Mets going to be involved there. But to get back to the original question, I think once free agency really starts, when they can talk to other teams, I think Nimmo will be there.
Yeah, no, and you brought up the point as far as how the drop off was so stark with as far as Diaz and everybody else in the the reliever market, the closer market. It's the same deal with Nimmo, like you're saying, in the center field market. So it'd be nice if the Mets could get lucky twice in a row there to get these guys, both of those guys, locked up. But I think as far as what you're saying, I agree. He's just probably leaving too much money in the open market to at least not test it. And it's funny, you think of the Mets' lack of being able to develop homegrown everyday players, right? Nimmo's at the top of that list of success stories now, one of the few of the last few years. And you think about Michael Conforto, right? The player everybody thought he was going to turn into. Nimmo, now a little different game, right? Because as far as Nimmo's not that kind of power hitter that people thought Conforto would be, Nimmo's more of a top of lineup table setter, but a guy that plays a great defensive outfield, plays every day, is an impact player. A lot of people, like you're saying, for years didn't think about that as Nimmo. And it wasn't until maybe even last year when people didn't think he was, really an everyday outfielder, right? So his, it's cool to see a guy like that. You said, been with the Mets his entire career. They drafted him out of high school. He's developed and gotten better every year he's been here. So it's tough to see a guy like that go. I just, like you said, there's a lot of free agents the Mets have, and they're not going to be able to re-sign everybody. And at some point, there's going to be teams that probably can just go a little more, whether it's years, like you're saying, another guarantee or whatever. But different position. There happens to be a pretty good, now I'm going to call him a middle infielder, because if he comes to the Mets, he's not going to be playing shortstop. But a very speedy, very Met killerish middle infielder that over the summer said he loves to play at Citi Field and would love to play with Jacob deGrom. One of those could be true, maybe two, we don't know. But that guy's Trea Turner. Now, is he a center fielder? No, I understand that. But with McNeil's defensive versatility and Marte, originally being here, signed here as a center fielder, could you see the Mets then? And I'm not saying to shift away from Nimmo, but let's say that Nimmo, they lose out on the Nimmo sweepstakes, right? He goes to another team and Trea Turner's still there. Do you think that would be a good, I don't even want to call it a second option because Turner's phenomenal, but shifting gears, so to speak, and maybe then moving McNeil permanently to a corner outfield spot and saying, hey, Trea Turner, come up, play up the middle of Francisco Lindor for a few years?
Yeah, I mean, people I've talked to, that was kind of the buzz all over baseball the last 24 hours or so, is the Mets were at least putting it out there that they really like Trea Turner and they're going to be involved. And I don't think it just hinges on Brandon Nimmo.
Okay.
I think there's a reality, obviously a slim one given the type of contracts they're both going to get. I mean, Nimmo's going to get over 100 million. Trea Turner's probably going to get over 200 million. That they signed both of them. I don't think when they signed Nimmo, I don't think that would just take them out of the Turner sweepstakes. Um, Look, we're living in Steve Cohen's world now.
Yes.
It's not the Wilpons. I mean, that would have to be a scenario where they weren't able to like sign Jacob DeGrom, stuff
Right.
like that, where they saved, well, not saved money on pitching, but they weren't able to spend as much money on pitching. But getting back to the original, I mean, Trea Turner has experience in center field too. He played in center field with the Nationals. Look, again, it's the Steve Cohen Mets. Trea Turner's going to be one of the best position players on the free agent market, and you can make him fit with the Mets. Look, he's played second base. He's played some outfield. The Mets have some pieces they can move around. Like you said, you could sign Turner, put McNeil in right field, and put Marte in center, and you're not really making any position worse, really.
Right.
I mean, Turner's going to be good at second. He's going to be very good at second. McNeil is very good in the outfield. I guess your biggest question is Marte at 34 coming off a core muscle surgery playing center field. Obviously, that would be less than ideal, but you just added Trea Turner's bat to the lineup. So, I mean, it'd be tough to argue with maybe getting a slightly beat up Marte in center field. You could bring up, I mean, friend of the show, Jake Mangum, he could be the defensive caddy for Marte if it came down to that, or you sign a veteran defensive caddy, Kevin Kiermaier, that we have mentioned. Yeah, I mean, that's certainly an option. I mean, it's a really good option. Just think about, I know, like you said, Nimmo is good. Nimmo isn't the same type of player Trea Turner is. He's just not. Trea Turner's a better offensive player, and he's been a more consistent, healthy offensive player than Nimmo. And yeah, when that type of guy becomes available and there's at least the chance of him, I mean, other guys like Xander Bogaerts, I mean, the Mets aren't going after Xander Bogaerts. He's coming off a great year defensively at shortstop. He's not going to sign and move to somewhere, third base, whatever. Turner has experience at second. He has experience in center field. Like you said, last year, I think it was in July of last year, he was doing an interview when he said that his favorite ballpark was Citi Field and he'd love to be teammates with Jacob DeGrom. I mean, ultimately, that doesn't mean a ton, but it's good to know that Turner wouldn't hate playing in New York, obviously. He's obviously a gamer, go to play in New York. That would be, so the top of your lineup is Turner, Marte, Lindor, Alonso, McNeil. Those five guys. I mean,
sign me up.
Yeah, I mean,
sign me up.
And the other thing too to think about, the difference between the two players is Nimmo is fast, doesn't steal bases. Turner is fast, steals a lot of bases. And with the new rules next year, there's going to be a lot more running. That we saw it in the minor leagues the last couple of years with the sizes of the bases change, the pickoff move changes, and the pitch clock. All three of them combined turned the minor leagues into more of a free-for-all when we're talking about stolen bases. So you could see teams starting to kind of emphasize that skill set a little more, and who's better on this free agent market to emphasize than Trea Turner in that regard. So Marte stays healthy and Trea Turner stays healthy. That's two guys at the top of the lineup that could steal close to 100 bags together. And that's Lindor right behind them could steal 20. So it would be a little different dynamic. I know we've talked about that the Mets need to add some power. I mean, Trea Turner's got quite a bit of pop. He's been a 20, 30 home run guy. So you're not losing any power there from going to Nimmo to Turner if that's the scenario we're talking. And you're certainly adding a stolen base dynamic. So yeah, I think look, the Mets really like him. The Mets are going to be involved in a lot of free agents. Um, they're going to be interested in a lot of guys. They're going to have a lot of different options. Um, we're going to say it a lot. The Mets have a lot of free agents. They have a lot of holes to fill.
Yep.
So there's got to be this option A, B, C. If this doesn't happen, we can do this. If this happens, we can shift to this. Because like we've talked about too, is that there's no perfect, there's no really deep position at all, I don't think, in my opinion, in this free agent market.
No.
There's some pretty good twos in the starting pitching and a couple of ones. But I mean, position wise, if you lose out on Nimmo, the Mets would have to get creative. And that's kind of what Billy Epler said. He said the Mets were comfortable with Marte in center, and this would be the exact scenario that we're talking about. Assuming that they wouldn't want to put Turner out in center. I think Turner would probably be more comfortable having played second base more recently. And we know McNeil's just going to play wherever you tell him to.
Right.
And I'm sure Marte would welcome going back to where he's used to playing at center. So, yeah, I think everything I've heard about their interest in Turner is real. And again, I don't think it's necessarily like, oh, if we miss out on Nimmo, they're just going to have interest there.
Right.
Obviously, like you said, if they miss out on Nimmo, I think that would intensify Turner, just because there isn't center field options, and there isn't really like another huge, or I can't think of another huge second base option where you're like, well, this is the guy we can move move McNeil. And there's no, I mean, outside of Aaron Judge, there's no big right field option either to move Marte over. That would, there's like a Mitch Haniger and a Jock Peterson.
Right.
Those guys aren't bad, but they're not Aaron Judge, Trea Turner, Dansby Swanson, Xander Bogaerts, those type of offensive talents. So, yeah, I think the Mets, they're going to have to be flexible within their plans. Like we know, these things can happen fast. We saw it last offseason. Once some moves started happening, it just went quick. So the Mets have kind of have to have these different options and plans in place to fill all these holes. They can't get stuck in the grass, because they blink and they're going to be down 4 or 5 guys on the depth chart and have a tough time filling it.
Yeah, wow. Just thinking of the fact of having a Trea Turner and a Nimmo in the same lineup, that's nuts. The Steve Cohen era, right? It's disappointing, like how the year ended, right? And also like the impending of how we talked about, like now you have half the team that's free agents. But when you have an owner like Cohen, right, and this kind of regime, they retool quickly, like we talk about the A, B, C options. I'm sure that they have a plethora as far as like, we want to mix a couple of our A or B or C. And if they can get that clump of what they're looking for, that mixture, and I'm sure it's a few different formulas as far as what we're talking about, obviously, because things can change super quick. But, I don't think that they're going to be necessarily left in the dust for a lot of these guys. I think that they're, Cohen doesn't probably want to be made to look foolish either, going all in on 1 year and then, not to sustaining the success. I think that's probably most important and seems to be with them, outside of kind of the entertainment value. But winning, I think, is a big part of that for them. It's a lot of good speculation. Turner would be amazing. Listen, I'll even say, as far as for the Mets are concerned, he's a better fit than Aaron Judge. And I don't say that because I would love 60 homers in a lineup. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying, but because of the defensive versatility that Turner has, and you can kind of, if you listen, you bring in an Aaron Judge, it's great, but your outfield's pretty log jammed, and in a couple of years, it's going to be pretty stiff defensively, I would say. You bring in a guy like Turner, can change a lot of things up. He can play multiple positions. Like you said, McNeil just plays literally any way you need him to, so that opens that up. Very interesting. It would be very cool to see him with that uniform. I'm not killing the Mets for once. But anything can happen there. I guess we talked about DeGrom really quick. You brought him up. I don't want to go too much into it because I think it's a genuine mystery. He could go literally he could re-sign with the Mets. I wouldn't be surprised. He signed with the Rangers for a huge deal. I wouldn't be surprised. The salary predictions, that I've seen so far are a lot of comp to Scherzer. You can correct me if I'm wrong, the years and kind of the dollars. If that's the case, then you would think that the Mets would be the front runners. I would assume that the biggest thing for DeGrom is he wants years, right? That would be the biggest thing at this point. But if he's willing to take a 3 or 4 year deal like Scherzer at 40 something a year, let's go. Sign up. Let's do it. But I'm just curious what you think there with him, as far as if any of that has like holds any water as far as those years, because it just the years wise seems short to me, because that seems why more than anything what he would be looking for is securities, obviously, money wise, but more security years wise, with the age that he is.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's any secret, and it's kind of been talked about a little bit in baseball circles that in the end, DeGrom wasn't really upset with the Mets. He was just upset in what he was getting paid. And I mean, it's tough to argue with him. At the end of his deal, he ended up not really getting ace money.
Should have hired a better agent.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, I think he's going to try to get more than Scherzer, and obviously at least the 3 years that Scherzer got. I think he's 30. I got a feeling that some team, whether it's the Mets, it could be the Mets, it could be a couple other teams. I got a feeling someone will at least give him a pretty easily attainable 4th year. And I think that's what he's going to look for. I don't see any way he doesn't sign for probably 4 years guaranteed. I would really think is what he's going to end up getting. And around Scherzer money, probably a little more than what Scherzer got. Look, again, yeah, I think it's tough. Mark Canna talked about how the fact that DeGrom told him that he liked New York and he'd like to be back. Zach Wheeler and Noah Syndergaard kind of echoed the same thing. And I think that kind of people are trying to get whispers out there that he wasn't happy with New York. I think at times Jacob DeGrom, he doesn't love talking to the media, but there's plenty of guys that don't love talking to. I don't think Max Scherzer particularly likes talking to the media. When you see him talk in the clubhouse and stuff, it doesn't seem particularly too happy that he has to do it, but he does it, and he pitches in New York and he goes about his way. I think if the Mets give DeGrom what he wants, he'll stay in New York and he'll pitch in New York, and he'll talk to the media. I will say the one thing I do think is plausible to think about is the fact that DeGrom would prefer to stay with a team that trains in Florida.
Right.
Look, he's from Florida. He's always trained in Florida. He's 34. I mean, I think unless some team like the Rangers, which there's a good chance that they're going to spend some money on a pitcher this year, unless someone just completely blows other offers out of the water, I do think he would prefer to stay with a team that trains in Florida. And I mean, that just makes sense. It's not crazy. I mean, Max Scherzer kind of wanted the same thing, and that was a bonus for him to sign with the Mets. So again, I don't think that's it might not decide where he goes, but it'll certainly be a bonus for any team showing interest that they train in Florida. And yeah, I think ultimately 4 years at a little bit more than what Scherzer got is what gets it done. And Steve Cohen said it a couple of months ago. I mean, he's going to do everything he can to keep DeGrom in New York. The Mets don't want to see him go anywhere. I mean, right now it's Scherzer and David Peterson and Tyler McGill and Joey Lucchesi in the rotation, which kind of brings me to something to kind of shift off DeGrom, because I think we've pretty much covered it, is I'm a little surprised at this point that the Mets haven't just come out and announced that they've picked up the option on Carlos Carrasco.
Yeah, right.
$14 million. Unless there's something medically that we don't know about. It just seems like a no-brainer and something that you would want to get out of the way. I mean, the Yankees did it with Severino. You've seen it a ton over the last 2 days, teams picking up options or declining options on players. They directly asked Billy Epler on the show for New York Post, and he kind of sideswiped it, which, I mean, it makes sense if they hadn't told Carrasco what they're going to do yet. But to me, it just felt like one of those, oh, hey, the offseason started. Let's announce that we've picked up the option on Carrasco. Now, $14 million for a starting pitcher these days is nothing.
Right.
Carrasco pitched pretty well this year. Didn't really show any signs of slowing down, really. It's going to be a guy that gives you 150 innings and pitches to like a 370 RA. I mean, that for 14 million, every team in baseball is going to sign up for that.
Yeah.
And again, with the uncertainty they have, Walker and DeGrom officially became free agents today, and Bassett is going to become a free agent at some point. It feels like something else is going on if they don't just pick up the option in the next day or two. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to kind of drag it out with Carrasco. I mean, you would think they'd have what they want for a decision already made. So I just can't imagine that they're not going to pick up the option unless there's something we don't know about.
Right.
So I'd kind of look for that tomorrow. And then they got to start deciding on qualifying offers.
Right.
DeGrom obviously is getting one. Nimmo obviously is getting one. Bassett, assuming he declines, he'll get one too, because the qualifying offer is 600,000 more than his option. So obviously he's going to decline it. And then I think the real question is Walker. With a qualifying offer at 19.65 million, do you want to offer that to Walker? Because I think if you do offer it to Walker, there's certainly a chance that he could accept it.
Right.
Obviously, he would be a guy that wants to get a long-term deal, but I think on a long-term deal, I think one of the predictions I saw was 5 years, 70 million. I don't think he's likely to get 5 years, but I think that average annual value is right to where he's probably going to end up. So he's not going to get 19 million a year on the free agent market, I don't believe. So it'd be up to him. Well, I don't think he'd have a choice at that point, because you'd really hinder his market by giving him the qualifying offer and him declining. I don't think teams are going to want to give up 70 million and a draft pick to get Taijuan Walker. So I think if you give it to him, he'll accept. And I think that you kind of drag that out as long as you can for the Mets to decide what you're going to do with Carrasco. Kind of get a feeling of where Bassett's head is, kind of get a better feeling of where DeGrom is, because if you have a feeling that, say, Bassett and DeGrom, you don't feel strongly about either of those guys, or even just one of those guys, you have to seriously consider giving Walker the qualifying offer, because you need that rotation depth. They just don't have the pitching outside of Peterson and McGill, and I think you can say McGill's a pretty big question mark at this point.
Right.
So I think they would like. There's a potential that the certainty of having Walker in the rotation for next year is certainly worth the 19 million.
Yeah, no, agreed there. Like we've said at that point, they need bodies, right? And especially in baseball now, you need at least 6 or 7 starters, right, to get through a season. So, it's kind of a no-brainer. And for as far as preference, would you rather the Mets bring back a Bassett, a Walker, or like try and bring back both? I know obviously you talk at things depends, as far as if Walker's taking a qualifying offer or not, but do you have a preference out of either of those two guys?
I think it, yeah. Out of the two pitchers, I think Bassett's the better pitcher. I think it's pretty close, and it's kind of different because Walker's pretty younger, a couple years younger, and he's got less mileage on his arm. Well, they neither of them have a ton of mileage, because Bassett was kind of a late bloomer, and Walker missed significant time with injuries. So yeah, it's kind of toss up, like see who the Mets prefer. I think Bassett is probably the better pitcher on a short-term deal. If you want to go a longer-term deal, I think I'd take Taijuan just because of his age. And I do think there's potentially, like, you could get a little bit more out of Taijuan too. Like there's just messing with a pitch here or a pitch there. I think he's the type of guy you can get into like a drive line type program and might be able to get something a little bit more out of him. I think Bassett is what he is. He's a really good, crafty pitcher, but I think once he loses a tick or two on his fastball, he's going to have a tough time getting hitters out consistently. So I think part of it will come down to, I know that same prediction I think had Bassett at 3 years, 66 million. So similar, you're talking similar, very, very similar money, but you would get Walker for 2 more years than you would get Bassett. So I think you've got to kind of find what your preference is there. And that'll certainly matter to what part of the offseason you get into those discussions. Let's say the Mets sign Nimmo tomorrow and they sign DeGrom a week from now. And then they still have Bassett and Walker as options.
Right.
Walker is going to be the guy that has the lower AAV.
Mm-hmm.
So that might be the guy that they end up preferring in that situation just because of that. Look, the Mets went over the luxury tax this year. They're certainly going to go over it next year, but
right.
Obviously you don't want to just blow past it because you have to pay the penalty on it. So yeah, I mean, they're not going to spend like sailors. I think even Steve Cohen said that at some point. So yeah, I think in some situations, I think Bassett is the better choice, and in others Walker is, but if I'm talking just for next year, I take Bassett of the two.
Interesting. Yeah, no, it's a weird thing to look, especially, Bassett really didn't pitch well last two starts of the year, and the playoff series against the Padres. But yeah, they're going to need arms, so they'll have to figure out something. I'm sure Carlos Rondon will be a name that they'll look at as the winter goes on here now, depending on what happens. But it's just going to be very busy. The front office is going to be very busy. I wouldn't want to be them. This is a very important off season, but it's a lot of fun, and it's a lot of fun again for us as Met fans to not have to worry about or just think about them shopping in the clearance bin. Right? This is all premium grade A USDA choice, as Scott Boras would say, shopping in the premium section. So this will be fun. It's going to probably be a stressful couple months here, but I have faith in the front office. Listen, Billy Epler basically came in right before the new year as like their 8th choice as general manager last year. Remember how that all happened? Came in, did a bang up job before the lockout, and they won 100 games. So, I think that there should be a lot of confidence that even with, how much potential turnover the Mets have, I think this regime will figure out a way to stay competitive and, be a contender again. And I guess we should end the show with, it was an announcement of Buck Showalter. Not really surprisingly, was finalist for NL Manager of the Year. The 3 finalists won 3 playoff games combined after winning about 315 regular season games. It's obviously Snicker, Roberts, and Buck as the finalists. But just, quick thoughts on that. I don't think anybody's really surprised. I think it's kind of a crapshoot of the 3 who could win. You could pick any of them, but, I don't think anybody's surprised that Buck was a finalist.
No, yeah, and Buck won the Sporting News Manager of the Year. So, I mean, yeah, I don't think there's any favorite of those 3. I mean, if you're going to go by wins, you could essentially just make it the Dave Roberts Award every year if you wanted to. But yeah, I think it'll probably come down to Snicker and Buck, and obviously kind of for different reasons. Snicker for a great end of the season, and Showalter for the great start, and just, I mean, a great overall season compared to 2021. I know Mets fans, it didn't feel like a good season, but for them to jump from 77 to 101 wins is a pretty big thing. So, yeah, I mean, it's good for Buck. I'm glad to see that he's getting some props, and we'll see what happens there. I think the one thing we should touch on real quick before we go is the Angels GM coming out and saying that Shohei Ohtani is going nowhere. He said just a little bit before we started recording the show that he is not trading Ohtani this offseason. He could have waited a couple of months and let us go through some rumors before he did that and let us have some fun. But not to dig too deep into it, but I mean, it stinks from a Mets fan standpoint.
Right.
Obviously, there was the dreams of the Mets trading for Ohtani. Obviously, he's one of the best players, and he filled so many fits for not just the Mets. I mean, a lot of teams, but the Mets have so many holes that he would have been a perfect, because you saved the roster spot. He gets you that power bat and that starting pitcher. So we'll just have to wait a year to
exactly.
I mean, Billy Epler's the guy that brought him to the Angels. So you got to feel it stinks that it won't be available this offseason, but assuming that he doesn't lock himself in with the Angels, which I can't imagine he would at this point, unless they throw out like some crazy number.
Right.
It would really be not. I don't want to say smart, but it would be kind of silly for Ohtani at this point to sign an extension. Why not hit the open market next year, where assuming he stays healthy, he's got a blank check. It's just a blank check next offseason, and a blank check with the Mets are going to be involved. With Epler as the GM, he's going to push for Ohtani. And how's Steve Cohen going to tell him, no, Billy, not this guy? Like, you want to talk about a draw? I mean, Ohtani on an East Coast team in New York, yeah, that's a huge draw. So I guess we'll have to wait one more year to kind of salivate, or maybe trade deadline.
Right. Yeah. Maybe July, maybe January. Who knows? Right. It's all speculation. You would think they're trying to sell the team. You would think they maybe want to entice the new owners. You keep the two big studs around, which is interesting because the Nationals did the exact opposite with Juan Soto. So it's just it's different strokes, different folks, I guess. We'll see in 2035 when the Mets finally sign Shohei Ohtani at 40 years old and they get David Stearns in here. Everyone will be very excited. We'll get our guys now. But,
I mean, just think about it, though. Just think about having Ohtani and then losing him and not getting anything for trade for him.
Right.
That would be the ultimate just like bad ran franchise.
Right.
I mean, right now you could get about 4 or 5 of the top prospects in baseball for Ohtani in a trade and then hold on to him, not sign him to extension. If he's still there at the deadline, you have to trade him. Right. You've missed your opportunity to get that massive haul, but at the trade deadline, you're still going to get a really, really good haul for a guy that's going to help the team in 2 ways. So, yeah, let's come back and talk about Ohtani in July.
Yeah, no, like I said, that would be amazing. We'll worry about the guys that are free agents now, but it's nice when you have ownership like this. You continue to dream big. It's a lot of fun. Obviously we'll wrap the show up there, put a big bow on it. We'll catch up with everybody next week on the latest of free agency. Hopefully it'll be a lot of good things. Nimmo, DeGrom, all that kind of stuff. But we'll keep you updated. Whatever happens here. And until then, let's go Mets.